Hey, welcome back to the 6R80 rebuild. This is going to be part 2, final assembly. So in this video we're going to basically finish the transmission, putting everything into the case, bolting the control body complex on, filter, pan gasket, done. So, and parking linkage too. There's a couple of things we need to do though prior to shoving everything into the case, and that is first we need to assemble the front clutch complex. So that's going to be your forward drum, your overdrive drum, forward clutch hub, intermediate shaft / overdrive clutch hub, all topped off by the direct clutch hub and that special snap ring. So we'll do that first, and then I need to show you how to measure your low reverse clutch pack clearance. So I'll get the camera closer to the bench. We'll go ahead and assemble that front clutch complex, and then from there we'll proceed to the low reverse and then start putting everything into the case. Alright, I'm going to start off by putting a little bit of Mercon LV fluid into this ashtray. This will kind of serve as our means to lubricate our bearings. And then what I want to do is just prep everything. So prep your shafts, lubricate your bushings, get everything ready to go for the final assembly. So I'm going to just do this with the pump kind of acting as a base, along with my little pump support tool or whatever. So I just lubricate everything, and then note the position of all the bearings. Okay, so all your bearings are going to have the inner race facing inboard, their respective locations. I mean, that's generally how most bearings are going to go. So just dip it in fluid, make sure it's nice and lubricated, make sure those needles are all thoroughly saturated with fluid. And you don't need a ton of green assembly lube. I generally use just enough to hold the bearing on. And the reason for that is I don't want anything potentially affecting end play. Alright. Next is going to be your forward hub bearing. And like I said, just a little bit of green assembly lube to hold it in place. That's all you really need. Okay, this bearing is going to be for the rear of the input shaft. Alright, so just let this kind of sit there for now. And then when it comes to mating your overdrive drum to your pump / forward drum, what I like to do is have my sealing ring tool just over the sealing rings to compress them and prep them for mating. These things like to kind of protrude a little bit, especially if they're just sitting on the bench instead of like either installed into the pump or with a sizing tool on, because I guess for whatever reason how they're made. But if you're not careful, you will try to install either the pump onto the the drum and shaft, or vice versa, and get caught up or inadvertently break one of these sealing rings, and they're $10 each from Ford. So just keep that in mind. And always lubricate your sizing tool. You want plenty of assembly lube. Alright, so the last bearing we need to really lubricate is this one. Alright, good to go. Now we'll go ahead and reinstall the input shaft / overdrive drum onto the rest of what you see here. So be very, very careful. If it starts to get hung up, just pull it out and reinstall the sizing tool. Okay, it should fully seat nice and easy. Alright, now you can go ahead and install your rear bearing for the input shaft. Now we're going to go ahead and install the hub. So we'll put a little assembly lube. And all we're going to do is just spline the hub onto the clutch. Okay, it should sit flush, so it's still sticking up. You can hear a friction disc underneath that's not fully mated. At least one of them, maybe two of them. Alright, we got one more. And I think that might be it. Alright. Once you can feel it spin nice and smooth like that, you know you're good to go. Okay, now you're going to have your forward hub. That's going to spline into the forward clutch pack. Let me put bushing. So just lube your bushings. Same with the journal surfaces. Okay, this one is a lot more cooperative, generally speaking. So just shimmy it, make sure that you're fully splined, and now you're ready to install your direct clutch hub. So here are the locking bosses, and then you have an engagement tab. That tab is going to mate with a little cutout in the drum, okay, for the forward drum. Alright, so now there's a certain way you have to install this thing. And when I say this thing, I mean the snap ring. Okay, if you try to install it in the traditional manner, you're going to have a problem getting the other side in. So, you know, you'll install it one side in, you'll work it all the way around, but you won't be able to get the other side past the locking boss. So whichever side you install first, the other side you'll never get in. So what they have you do is install both sides, okay, both sides at the same time, and that will allow you to install it correctly. So I'm going to try to reposition the camera so you can see the entire process, and then we'll resume. Okay, hopefully you have a good view of everything. So here are your locking bosses. The snap ring is going to come in at this orientation here with the larger of the two cutouts over here, and then the smaller of the two cutouts is going to nest between these locking bosses here with the cutout aligned with this little boss here on the far right. So what you want to do is come in, engage this side first, okay, get this side in position, because you want to get so that you're locked in, okay, on this side here between these three bosses. Then go ahead and come in and engage this side. Now this side here, the side with the three bosses, is going to want to come out. So you're going to have to do the best you can to keep it in position. Okay, so I have it partially installed here up until about this area, you know, back here on the drum. Alright, now what I'm going to try to do is come in and get this side to engage. Alright, so now we're engaged on both sides. Make sure you prevent it from popping out. Take your screwdriver, and pry inward till it's fully installed. Okay, and then just check it all the way around. Make sure everything is as it should be. And that's it. So now we can put this entire assembly to the side while we work on the rest of the case. Alright, now we're ready to determine our low reverse clutch pack clearance. So a couple of special tools you're going to need to do this. In fact, the book has you use 3 separate specialized tools. I have 2 of them, and they're the 2 gauge bars you see. It's part of a set. And then there's a third tool that I don't have, so I'm just going to use the calipers as an alternative method. But basically, you're going to have to take 3 measurements to determine your clearance. First measurement is going to consist of determining the overall height to within 1/1000th of an inch or so of the low reverse clutch pack basket within the case. In other words, the area where the low reverse clutch pack splines into. The second measurement you're going to need to take is of the clutch pack itself once it's installed into the case. And then the third measurement is going to be the difference in height between the top edge of the piston here for the low reverse to the deck surface on the rearward facing portion of the center support. And what you're going to do is you're going to take your first measurement, which is that clutch basket height area within the case, and then you're going to subtract the combined total or aggregate of the height of the clutch pack and the height of the apply piston, apply segments, if you will, lugs, in relation to this deck height here. So if we want to call the clutch basket in the case measurement, measurement A, and we want to call the overall height of the clutch pack measurement B, and we want to call this height measurement we're taking on the piston to center support measurement C, then the formula would be A minus the sum of B plus C equals your low reverse clutch pack clearance. Okay, so we're going to need the gauge bar set, a depth micrometer, and I'll flash the special tools tool number or tool designator on the screen. I don't know what it is, but if you don't have it, you're going to need dial calipers, calculator, and then maybe a notepad to record your values. So we have the clutch pack itself, 5 frictions, 5 flat steels, and a wave plate or cushion plate. We have the pressure plate or backing plate that came out of the unit, which is 188 thousandths thick, and then we have an additional pressure plate that is 206 thousandths thick. So there's either 3 or 4 different plates available, and it's these plates that you're going to use to dial in your clearance. Now, with that said, the direct clutch and the forward clutch flat steels will actually spline into the low reverse area. So, if you're really off on your clearance and you can't get it, quite dialed, I suppose you can substitute one of those thicker steels in. Say you have way too much for whatever reason, and you either don't have another pressure plate, or you do and you're still out. I guess you can substitute a thicker forward or direct clutch steel. Both are thicker than the low reverse flat steels, so that's kind of a last resort. I've never had to do it, so I couldn't tell you if there was, there'd be any kind of issues, with a slightly heavier plate in there, if there'd be a little bit more pronounced drag from the point of view of the driver, but that's just one option if you're kind of stuck. All right, I've already actually done this measurement process, so for the sake of run time, if you will, so that you don't see me fumbling around, I'm just going to walk you through it, and we'll go ahead and record the measurements, we'll do the quick math, and then we'll arrive at our clearance. So let me reposition the camera so it's looking into the barrel of the case. We'll set up the gauge bars, then we'll take the measurement using the depth micrometer, and then go from there. Okay, I think you have a good view into the case, so what we're going to do is install our gauge bar set. So first in is going to be the 307554/2, that is the shorter of the two, and then we're going to install 307554/1 over top of it. So you want to make sure that the surface is firmly seated on 2 case lugs here at the base of the clutch basket. So you'll notice each of the ends are rounded to conform to the curvature of the case. You just want to make sure you're firmly seated, otherwise your measurement won't be accurate. Next, followed up with 554/1. And same kind of deal. You want to make sure it's fully stabilized on the ledge where the center support lives. Next, you're going to grab your depth micrometer. And you're just going to go ahead and install it. Now I've already set this up to where it's exactly where it needs to be, so I kind of avoid fumbling around with it. So you'll notice it's reading 4 and change. Okay, so you have the 4 main hash mark exposed to correlate to 400,000ths of an inch, and then on your spindle you have looks like it's straddling between 12 and 13. So how you read a depth micrometer is you actually take the measurement that you can see visually, subtract it from 1, and that's your true measurement. So if we're going to use 612 thousandths here, then our true measurement is 388 thousandths, and then you simply add 1 to that, and that becomes your measurement A, and that's what you'll record. All right, now what we want to do is remove both gauge bars, and we're going to install the clutch pack itself into the case upside down so that you have your cushion plate facing rearward. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take a measurement of the total height or depth from the second gauge bar with our dial caliper. And like I said, there's a special tool that it's basically a fixture. It kind of rests in the case, and then you have a dial gauge attached to it, and the book has you use that tool to determine this deck height, if you will, or the height to the backing plate. So upside down in the case or backwards is how you're installing this clutch pack. So we're going to take the 188 thousandths backing plate and we're going to install that. So now we have the clutch installed into the case. So now we're going to put OTC 307554/1 back in. And you just want to make sure it's stable. You know, it's on the ledge. It's not bound up or anything like that. And then I'm going to grab my dial calipers because, like I said, I don't have that special fixture tool or whatever. And I'm just going to take 2 measurements, one on either side, and I'm going to average them. So it looks like 953 thousandths. And 955 thousandths. Alright, so we determined that measurement A was 1.388. That's the total height of the clutch basket itself in the case. Then we determined B, we're going to call it 0.954. And then I already measured C, and I determined that to be 0.371. But basically all you're going to do is you're going to take 0.954, add 0.371, 1.325 minus 1.388, 63 thousandths clearance. So you're right at the top end of the range if this is what you come up with. I could tell you that's perfectly fine. You can tighten it up with that thicker pressure plate, but over 1/1000th of an inch, I'm not too concerned, because unlike every other clutch pack in this case, low reverse is really going to only be on in reverse unless you're in manual mode. And even with manual mode, it's not going to be a problem. You're not going to have any kind of weird bind ups or anything like that. So as soon as you upshift, this clutch is going to release anyway. So 0.63, and it's within the margin of error as well, is fine. And when we took this clutch pack out of the case, if you watch the teardown inspection video, I mean, there was absolutely nothing wrong with it whatsoever. There was no complaints in reverse. So unlike all my other clutches, I'm not overly concerned about this one being right at the edge of spec, or even 1/1000 over like we see it. All right, now we're ready to install everything to the case for the final time. So make all your final preparations, including lubricating the rest of your bearings. So this is going to be your center support to planetary bearing. This spacer here is selective for the two-wheel drive units, so that goes to set and adjust your rear end play. This is going to be the bearing that goes on the back side of the planetary. And then this is the direct drum to center support thrust bearing. So you just want to make sure they're nice and soaked so that we'll be good to go once they're installed. So, you know, in other words, no dry starts. Common sense, really. Looks like I'm running out of fluid here. So the spacer is just going to sit in there just like that, and then it's going to sit in the sun gear like this, in the top sun gear on the rear planetary carrier. So I'll put that in after the planet goes in. We're going to install the ring gear first. So just make sure this bearing is also nice and lubricated. Alright, now what I'm going to do is reposition the camera so that you'll be able to see into the case as we're dropping stuff in. I've already installed the rear seal and prepped the bearings, so that's all done. It's just a matter of putting everything else back into the case and doing a front end plate check with the pump. So we have a 100 selective spacer there, and we also have a 108,000 thick spacer if we need it. Alright, we're going to start with our ring gear basket and output shaft assembly. So just do the best you can. Make sure you have a good firm grip. Lower it carefully into the case. Make sure it's fully seated. Next is going to be your planet. So a little bit of assembly lube on the back side of the bearing to hold it in place. And then same with the planet. You want to make sure you have a nice firm grip. Carefully lower it in. And then mesh the planet with the ring gear. All right, I'm gonna pour a little bit of transmission fluid. Yeah, into the gears just to kind of get them lubricated. All right, I already lubricated the bearings off camera, but this will give a little bit of extra added protection for startup. As soon as this thing fires up and, you know, it's this planetary ring gear, you know, the whole gear set starts working, lube oil will flood that whole back section of the case. But this helps prior to that taking place. Alright, now we're ready for the low reverse clutch pack to install it for the final time. So backing plate, you want the smooth side of the backing plate facing you. Alright, then friction. Steel friction, steel friction. So you run out of them. And if there's any doubt about clearance or, you know, whether or not something will work, assuming you kept your other, you know, your old frictions and steels that came out of here, and assuming they were in good shape like the ones out of this transmission, then you can compare the aggregate thicknesses or even stack them up to see if there's any, you know, material difference in your measurements. I mean, there shouldn't be, but you never know. All right, next is going to be the mechanical diode. So again, rotation is always counterclockwise and then locks to the clock or locks clockwise. So this is the 6 o'clock position right here where my hand is. I'm on the 9 o'clock position in the case. You want to make sure that you spline this diode in such that this large lug here is oriented at the 6 o'clock position, right where the bias spring is going to go. I was double checking my orientation. Alright, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to test fit the center support in here because I want to make sure that the center support is going to spline in. Okay, now it's in the way it should be. Alright, now we're going to install the bias spring. It's going to go in like this with this upturned portion here. This is going to face the passenger side or oriented toward the passenger side of the transmission. So it's going to go in just like this. And I'll show you where it actually ends up once we have the case upright, or, you know, belly up, so I should say. Okay, so now we have the bias spring in. As you can see, the diode can no longer react against the case lugs. Alright, now we're going to go ahead and put our Planet 2 center support thrust bearing in place. Just goes right here. Now for our center support. So first things we need to do is we need to put our keyways. There's two of them, one on each side, and those keyways prevent the center support from rotating in the case. All right, make sure that your feed ports are at the 6 o'clock position. Line up the keyway slots in the case with those on the center support and carefully lower it into the case. Just like that. All right, now you can go ahead and install your case snap ring for the center support. Okay, that's going to be that big one. So you can use pliers for this. There's some guys that are strong enough physically, they will just literally muscle it in by collapsing it, angling it, and then seating it. All right. I'm going to see if I could do that. I don't know if I'm going to be able to, you know, given where the camera is and whatnot. If not, I'll just use the big pliers. Okay, for the center support snap ring, just go ahead and kind of get it started in the case. The easiest way to do that is just to literally position it like so, and then get your snap ring pliers. Engage the two ends, and I'm orientating the ends 180 degrees out from the starter cutout in the bell housing. That's where they were initially, so that's what I'm doing. All right, let's go ahead and do an air check of the low reverse clutch pack just to make sure it's 100% good to go, and then we'll move on. Okay, we got our air nozzle in the low reverse feed port. So just kind of put a little bit of inward pressure on it. All right, and that higher pitched whooshing sound you're hearing is air coming out the back of the nozzle. Okay, that's a proper air check. So you can see the clearance. So right at the max range, 62, maybe 63 thousandths of an inch per our measurements. And then you just want to spin your output shaft, make sure nothing weird is going on. And then, as you can see, you have your bias spring. All right, now it's time to install everything else. So we'll reposition the camera back to a bird's eye view of the mouth of the case, and we'll proceed. All right, let's go ahead and install direct drum to center support thrust bearing, and then our direct drum. So just put a whole bunch of assembly lube on the shaft itself, the splines, the bushings. Just make sure everything is nice and lubricated. And then slowly lower the drum until you can mesh it with the intermediate clutch in the center support. Okay. All right, now it's time for the forward and overdrive clutch complex. So again, same deal. More lubrication. And then I'm going to bring that over here and carefully install it. Just want to check our bearing, make sure it's there. It is. And it's going to take some doing. Notice I have the ring sizing tool in place just to protect those sealing rings from any harm when it comes to, during installation. This angle's real awkward, so I'm gonna just take it out. What I'm doing is I'm taking a screwdriver, going through one of the cutouts in the case so that I can kind of manipulate the direct clutch hub and allow it to mesh with the direct clutch. And I'm doing that as I'm spinning the assembly here via the input shaft. All right, just check all the way around. You want to make sure that your mating surface here is above any point along the front leading edge of the forward drum. All right, now I'm going to bring the pump over. I'm not going to install the O-ring. I want to see where I'm at with endplay. So I'm going to lube up the surface here just to make sure nothing gets weird, but I'm going to leave the pump O-ring off so that I can easily lift it out if I need to swap selective spacers. Alright, so we have the pump bore lubed up. I've also lubricated the pump itself. The pump O-ring has been left off, so if you have your sealing ring sizer tool, just go ahead and carefully remove it at this time. And then make sure your selective spacer is on the rear of the pump, here on the stator. Just use enough assembly lube to hold it in place and nothing more. Have your pickup and bridge seal area oriented at the 6 o'clock position, and then just use whatever you want that works to align your bolt hole locations. So I'm just using a Phillips head screwdriver. You could use cut-off bolts, or bolts with the heads cut off. That work as well. So the main thing here is you want to be super careful when lowering this pump into the case. You do not want to have or risk breaking a sealing ring. So just let it slide over the sealing ring slowly. until it fully meets flush onto the deck surface. Alright, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to install my bolts, but I'm not going to install the little seals on those bolts. I'm just going to install the bolts. I may torque maybe every other one or so to 133 inch-pounds. That's the spec for all of them. And then I'll set up a dial indicator, we'll do vice grips, and we'll see what our front end play is before we put the pump O-ring on. So I know this kind of increases the risk a little bit. They might damage the sealing rings because you're taking the pump on and off at least twice. But the way I see it is, you know, it's just easier for me to lift up on the pump and get it out of here, and versus having the pump O-ring on. Alright, you can start threading the bolts in by hand. Alright, and as I'm sure you've noticed at this point, there is no pump to case gasket. These are just really finely machined surfaces. The rear of the pump cover and the case itself. So no gasket to take up any imperfections. So you just want to make sure that you're fully seated on the deck surface. And what I'm doing is I'm taking a thumb, sticking it in the filter area, and just holding it down. And I was like, I don't know, maybe about 20 thousandths off. So now I'm fully seated. Okay, real quick, I want to make a correction. These are 89 inch-pounds, not 133. I got mixed up with the pump body to pump cover assembly. So 89 inch-pounds in a crisscross pattern is how you want to do this. My apologies. Torque wrench is still set on 133. And you can go right to torque. So crisscross pattern. Alright, for an initial measurement, I think this is good. We'll take a final measurement once I have the pump installed for the final time. Alright, I'm going to set up the dial indicator and get everything ready, and then we'll do a check. Okay, we're set up, and I decided to torque the rest of the bolts that I hadn't torqued on camera off camera while I was setting up the indicators. So we're at 0, and now we're going to go ahead and lift up and see what kind of end play we have. So it looks like it's 21 thousandths. Okay, and you want to make sure that this is fully coming to rest as far rearward as possible. So that's why I'm kind of pushing down on it, because as it's working and, you know, transmission's operating and vehicles running, there's going to be thrust forces that will fully seat this rearward. So you want to make sure you duplicate those here to the extent you can. So 21 thou puts us at 6 thou over our book max. So we have our 1/10 thou spacer. So by shaving 10 thou off this, we'll be at book minimum, at or near book minimum. All right, if you had a choice, minimum versus maximum, at least with these transmissions, I'd actually rather be closer to the max, just simply because the case is very tight as it is. And so, you know, a little bit more breathing room isn't the end of the world. Now, if you were like 5,000s, 10,000s over the maximum, which is 15, then you'd definitely want to take measures to address that. Okay, so let me go ahead and reset everything. I'm going to install the pump for the final time, and we're going to exchange those thrust washers out, and we will take one final in-play check. And assuming we're within spec, then we're going to call that good, the case fully assembled. Alright, so now we're ready to install the pump for the final time. I removed my sizing tool, so we have the pump all lubed up. And this time I installed the selective spacer already in position down there in the bore. So you want to make sure you lubricate your stator, you know, where the sealing rings go, each and every time you take the pump out, because you want to make absolutely certain, or do the best you can to mitigate the risk, that you cut one of those sealing rings. Alright, so have your bridge seal and your filter pickup to 6 o'clock position. Carefully lower the pump into position, and then just use your screwdriver to kind of line up the bolt holes. Alright, let it settle in. And I could feel the O-ring basically hanging up the pump in the bore. So you should be able to just simply force it in like this by, you know, your body weight. But for this particular pump, for whatever reason, the O-ring is, you know, really tough. So I'm probably going to have to tap it in with a punch or something like that. I really don't like to do that with these, because you should be able to just, you know, force it in. Let me see if I can pick up some more leverage. By standing up on a step stool, so to speak. And I'll just put all my body weight on it and see if it'll go. Alright, there it goes. That's how it's supposed to go. They can be tough, but you just want to make sure that there's nothing binding up, or, you know, nothing actually preventing you from doing that. So anyway, needless to say, I don't think I cut any O-rings, but we won't know until we do the case air check. And if we did, then, well, I guess I get to do this all over again, or at least this part of the process. The nice thing is the forward drum bore there for the stator is wide enough that I don't actually have to take this assembly out to replace one of these sealing rings. So make sure your seals are all installed. And then the tightening sequence is just simply a crisscross pattern. I got one bolt outstanding. All right, just double check. I want to make sure I'm fully seated on the deck surface before I start cranking them down. Quarter-inch impact is fine. Yeah, I'm gonna strip any bolts out. Okay, if we're too tight on endplay for whatever reason, I'm not really sure what I'm going to do. I may, depending on how tight or not we are, I may let it ride or I may install that other shim. .89 pounds. So 13 total bolts. And looks like I have to replace my battery. Alright, give me a second while I do that and then we'll resume. Alright, I'm not exactly sure where I left off. So I'm just going to resume and kind of keep going with it until when I go around check them, I'll find ones that I haven't gotten to. And that was done. I started with these 3 right here. Yeah, so I'm good. Okay. I guess a battery emergency can strike at any time. So, is what it is. Okay, I can't feel anything there. That concerns me a little bit. May end up having to do that whole thing, that whole process all over again. This thing doesn't shake out. The way I want it to. And I just need 8/1000ths here. That's it. So let's see what I have. Alright, let's see if it sets back to 0. It actually sets below 0, so that's actually good. Okay, we're at 10 thou. No, 12 thou. Can't even read the dial indicator. 12/1000ths of an inch, that's perfect. So puts us kind of right in the middle of the spec. All right, so we have that 100 thou thick spacer for another job in the event we're too tight. The only two hard parts we replaced in this transmission were the intermediate shaft and the overdrive clutch hub. Everything else went back in, everything else was fine. And I don't know where in the world I got these two things. I mean, this is one of a set, and they're identical to each other. And this is just a cylinder head bolt from, I think, a small block Chevy, and then this is a nut from God knows where. Alright, so case is fully assembled. What we're going to do is turn the belly face up, and we will go ahead and install the belly components, including the bridge seal. We have the bias spring in. We will install our feed tubes for the low reverse, intermediate, and direct clutch, and then we'll go ahead and conduct a case air check. From there, I'll finish up the parking linkage, linkage, and get all that installed. Install the control body assembly, with the lead frame and the valve body, spacer plate assembly, and all that good stuff, and then filter, pan, and done. Alright, we're ready to do the case air check. So what I have here are the 3 feed tubes for the direct, low reverse, and intermediate clutch feed ports. So these tubes are all color coded. They're in the order in which they're going to go in from front to back. So the direct clutch is going to have a black one. The low reverse clutch is going to have an orange or a brown one. And then the intermediate clutch, the color is going to be blue. So they just sit right in there in their respective locations. For any 6R80 that has a mechanical diode, as you know, there will be no D2 feed port. Alright, so you have your forward clutch or A clutch up here, and then this is going to be your overdrive clutch or E clutch, and of course your B and direct. These are your 2 low reverse, and that's your intermediate or C clutch. Alright, so we'll try forward. Alright, that's good robust apply. Air is staying trapped in the circuit until I pull the nozzle away. Okay, our overdrive clutch. Alright, same deal. All of these clutches have like kind of opposing force to prevent centrifugal apply. It's basically called the compensator feed system, at least that's what GM calls it. I think ZF calls it their pressure balance system. But that's what that system of apply pistons and piston dams and the Belleville springs in between are all about. They work in conjunction with the different valves in the valve body to ensure that these clutches are in a constant state of readiness, but there's never any chance of centrifugal apply as long as the pressure balance system, the circuitry itself, is healthy and has good sealing integrity, and that's part of what we're testing here. So here's our B clutch. Alright, and you can see the clutch move. Alright, now we'll do our low reverse. It's going to be here. And then our intermediate clutch or C clutch. Okay, and you can see the clutch move when you put air to it. Alright, there's so much air pressure that it's blowing out the back of the nozzle, and that's actually what you're hearing. Okay, so here's your bias spring. And then you should be able to spin the output shaft. It's going to be very easy to spin in the direction engine rotation, which is clockwise if the transmission was, upright. But it's going to be very difficult to spin counterclockwise. So if you try to do it, I mean, it's just going to be difficult, especially on a 4x4. So you may have to, kind of give yourself an assist by moving the lugs on the ring gear. But you shouldn't have any binding. And same with the forward clutch, or input shaft. Okay, you should be able to spin the forward clutch drum / overdrive clutch / input shaft assembly while holding your rear ring gear like so. And it should not be such that the ring gear and everything back there will want to move forcibly against your other hand, okay? So spin in both directions. All right, everything should spin nice and free, independent of each other, front and back. So right now I'm holding the input shaft and I'm spinning the output shaft. All right, so that's kind of like our, I guess, case integrity checks, if you will. So we have good sealing integrity, and then all these parts and components are spinning just like they should. All of the clutch circuits are applying, with good solid, whoomp and then release. Air is staying trapped in the circuits, and that's what we want. All right, so now we're ready to move on. We'll put our bridge seal in, and then I'm going to do the parking linkage. And then from there, it's control body complex, filter, gasket, pan, and done. All right, so here are all parts for your parking linkage. So you have your parking pole itself. This is your rooster comb and your parking engagement rod. This is your parking rod guide plate. Then you have your return spring, your guide plate, and parking pole pin. This is going to be your spacer for your rooster comb. This is going to be your D10 roller, your selector shaft. This is going to be the case plug with a seal, your roll pin for the rooster comb, and then you have your selector shaft seal, and then of course you have the lever for the external portion of the linkage. All right, so let's go ahead and start putting all of this stuff onto the case. We'll begin with the selector shaft seal and then kind of work our way from there. Okay, so your selector seal is going to go here. All right, I'll hold it up like this so you can kind of see it. Otherwise, it might blend into the glove. But you want this side facing you, and you want this side facing inboard. So just get it as square as you can in the case. And then I use this tool for pretty much all my selector seals, but a socket of suitable size will work as well. Okay, pound it in until it won't go in anymore, and that's it. Pretty simple. All right, now I'm going to reposition the camera because this is kind of an awkward angle, so we'll go back to like a front-facing view, or at least where you can see the case looking in from that direction, and then we'll install everything else. All right, next thing you're going to want to do is install your D10 roller. So this is going to be the side that faces you, and this is the side that faces into the case. Notice the locating dowel. So these get 106 inch-pounds and the bolts are 8 millimeter. All right, next you can go ahead and position your components. All right, we'll go ahead and start with the parking pole and the pole guide pin and return spring. So here's how it goes. So you have your spring in just like this, and then all you're going to do is come with it like so, almost vertical in the case, and then just align your rod, install the rod all the way in, and you'll have your parking pole in position. Alright, next is going to be the pin plug and the little seal. The seal has a beveled side. That beveled side faces up when you install it onto the plug itself.
Just carefully work it over the threads. And then do what you can to seat it in that recess. Alright, you don't need any thread sealant or whatever on the threads themselves. That seal will act as the means of preventing fluid from, from getting at it, out leaking at this location outside the case. A very discombobulated way of saying that. So this bolt gets 17 foot-pounds, and I believe it's 4mm Allen. Oh, I stand corrected. It's 6mm, not 4. 6. 17 foot-pounds, 6mm. Alright, so that's in. Now we're going to install the rest of the linkage. Alright, now go ahead and lube up your selector shaft. And what you're going to do is you're going to just position it in so that it's kind of just inside the case wall here. Okay, just like that. Now grab your rooster comb and connect it with the parking rod, and you want to arrange it just like this so that your manual lever engagement stud here is facing outward toward the edge of the case, and you have your roll pin location inboard, because your spacer, which is going to go here, is going to thrust against this surface right here. So I'm positioning it in kind of the, parking location, if you will. And I'm just gonna get the spacer in position, and then I'm just then push the selector shaft through so it'll go all the way in. Alright, I have my roll pin location lined up, and I'm seated here in this inboard locating position. So for your roll pin, you're going to need a 3/16 roll pin punch. Alright, so I'm going to start by just simply tapping the roll pin in to get it going. And once I got it started like that, I'll go ahead and move to the punch and the hammer. And just seat it so it's flush. Alright, next is going to be the guide plate. So these are also 8mm. And it's going to be positioned just like this. I'm going to throw my bolts around. It's like I'm asking for something small to get trapped inside the case. All right, 106 inch-pounds on those little bolts. Okay, now it's in park. All right, now if you're gonna find yourself on like a grade, you'll notice how much play there is there. Don't let this slam into park because you could endanger this pole. I've never personally seen one of these broken because I've not done a lot of these transmissions, but I have seen parking poles broken in GM Ford transmissions where the I guess the driver just let the whole vehicle, the entire weight, slam into the pole as it engaged the parking lugs. So you do that enough times, you know, you're going to lose the parking pole. It's gonna break. All right, that's a 13mm nut for your selector. I'm just going to cinch it on. Okay, parking pole, mechanism, everything to do with, you know, that whole deal is done. So your detent. Okay. Next is the bridge seal. Pretty simple mechanism. All you're going to do is put the 4 little seals into the housing itself and then install it. That's basically it. So this side here faces down. It just sits in here like this. And then your cooler thermostat element thing. All right. So I'm still waiting on solenoids. Once I get those solenoids in, then we'll go ahead and finish up the valve body. I'll put that back together, and we'll bolt that whole complex with the lead frame and, you know, spacer plate and all that stuff onto the case. Put the filter in, the pan on, you know, with the gasket obviously, and then, you know, we'll basically call this done. The only other thing we need to do is put the little dipstick thing back in. All right, now we're ready to go ahead and bolt the entire control body complex to the case for the final time. So a couple of preparatory steps you want to make. First, grab your pass-through connector and lube up all your O-rings as well as the bore. Just use plenty of assembly lube. Make sure your bridge seal's in place if you haven't already done so. Make sure that has some assembly lube on it. If you have a thermal bypass element, make sure that's in there. And then just check all your seals for your feed tubes to the center support. So here's your direct, here's your low reverse. There's not going to be a D2 if you have a mechanical diode. You'll have your D1, and then you'll have your intermediate clutch. So just make a good check there. I like to have the transmission in park when I do this. So it's in park right now, and everything else looks copacetic. So now we're going to go ahead and install everything. So you have 8 large bolts, they take Torx 30, and then you're going to have 3 smaller bolts here that just go from the lead frame to the case, and they also take a Torx 30. Okay, so you're going to want to have your latch up, and then the rest is just simply making sure that the manual valve engagement stud on the rooster comb interfaces or engages the manual valve on the opposite side that the transmission range sensor is engaging it with. Just carefully lower it into position. Now do what you need to do to make sure that that manual valve gets engaged as it needs to. And then just settle it on in. Make sure all your bolt holes line up. That's good to go. It's going to be a little bit wonky just because you have your bridge seal. So this hole right here, nothing is going to go here, okay? No bolt goes there, there's no alignment dowel or whatever. It's just an empty pass-through port through the entire assembly, okay? The rest of the ports or rest of the holes, they're going to take bolts. Nice thing about these valve body assemblies is you really don't have to worry about not being able to pass through these assembly to case bolts, simply because all the alignment is kind of done for you by the lead frame. So it makes this part of the assembly just very straightforward and trouble-free. So I'm just going to run these bolts down with literally the most minimal amount of torque that I can, just to get things started. And as you can see, it's settling onto the case as it should. Alright, one last one to run down. That's it. Alright, just like the assembly itself, there is a torque sequence that you have to follow in mating the assembly to the case. So 71 inch-pounds on all bolts, and I don't know if you could see this, but I numbered each of the bolts based on where we're going to go in order of torquing. So it's going to be number 1, 2, it's going to be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. So 71 inch-pounds, and we'll begin number 1. Here's number 2. And 3, and so forth. Last but not least is number 11. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and install our pass-through case connector. So I failed to show this to you when I had the whole assembly in front of the camera, but you'll notice here on the connector itself there is an alignment tab. In fact, let me get a flashlight. I mean, for you guys that have done this before, this is nothing new, but for anybody that's new to it, it's important to point that out. So, alright, you're going to line that up with the slot in the pass-through connector, or I should say, tab on the pass-through connector. So the slot is on the connector in the lid frame, and the connector has the tab. Alright, once it's fully seated, then you'll be able to collapse the locking latch. Okay, if you're just a little bit off, it won't let you seat it. So I had to use a little bit more force than I figured, but no big deal. Okay, the last thing we need to do to complete the job is to install the filter and pan gasket and pan. And that's basically it. So lube up your filter location here for your pickup seal, and then all you want to do, just to double check if you haven't done this already, is take the transmission out of park and spin your shafts. So try to spin them in both directions. For a 4x4 unit, unless you have a slip yoke or something, it's going to be very difficult to spin the shaft counterclockwise. But the main thing is you want to make sure that nothing is coming in contact with your speed sensors. I mean, there's no reason it should, but you just want to double check. At least I do. If you find it unnecessary, that's perfectly fine, and I mean, it's just a habit, I guess. But that's what I do, so that's what I'm recommending. Alright, next, let's take a look at the pan real quick. Here first I'll lay the filter onto the deck, and then we'll take a look at the pan. So here's your pan. You notice these 4 bosses? There's 4 identical bosses on your filter. So you just want to make sure that when you install it, it's oriented roughly correctly and that there's nothing in the pan that's going to interfere with these bosses. Because that's what actually holds the filter in place. You know, those are the points of contact between the pan and the filter. So there's a slight interference fit just so that the filter doesn't ever come out. And then a magnet to the rear. Okay, all the pan to case bolts take 106 inch-pounds, 8mm socket. Okay, 106 inch-pounds. No specific torquing or tightening sequence. I just generally start here on the pan rails, crisscross from the center to the 2 ends, front and rear. Let me grab an extension. All right, that's all of them. I don't know. This thing was drifting back, so it may have drifted out of the camera, or out of the view rather. Okay, this transmission is basically done. The only other thing that we would need to do, and we're not going to do it here because I'm not installing this, is to put the seal on the little dipstick tube plug and the dipstick itself and install that. So here's the plug, here's the dipstick, and here's the little seal that goes right here in the recess. So I'm going to take the old seal out, and then I'm going to give the seal separate. Well, actually I can install it. I'm going to just give these things in a plastic bag to the primary tech shop so that they can get it installed once they're done filling the transmission with fluid. So much like the seal on the parking pole guide rod plug, this seal is such that you have a beveled side and then you have a perfectly flat side. The beveled side faces toward the threads. The flat side faces inboard. All right, I'm just going to thread it in part way. Okay, so we'll summarize real quick. This build was a complete and total overhaul. It received a clutch module, steel module overhaul kit. It also received a new intermediate shaft and overdrive clutch hub. The other one was snapped in half. We also put in an upgraded overdrive clutch pack. We had to improvise a little bit on that clutch pack because of the issue with too much clearance based on the items we had and everything that came in it. So no big deal. The clearances for all these clutches are exactly where they need to be. Low reverse was on the high side, 63 thousandths, but that's how it came in, and there's going to be no problem with reverse rather. Let's see, what else? Sonic zip kit, new spacer plate, all new solenoids, all new lead frame or lead frame, and everything else is basically new bushings. The bushings in these units are kind of a pain, so just, if you never built one of these before, just know that you're going to be into it for some time when it comes to the bushings. Alright, what else did we do here? All the bearings were in excellent shape. The thing came in due to a drive shaft failure that led to the intermediate shaft failure, and then the overdrive clutch that came out of here was oddly delaminated. And even now, at the end of the build, I still don't know. I still don't know why that happened. All new torque converter, stock stall, nothing fancy. Never ever reuse your torque converter. Always put a new one on if you're overhauling the transmission. Alright, anything else I need to mention here? Okay, the valve body, it also received a central valve bodies drop-in oversized valve kit, and that was the pressure regulator valve and the solenoid regulator valve. They both tested a little weak. The solenoid regulator valve wasn't too bad. That had 14.5 inches of lift, I think, if I recall correctly. The pressure regulator valve was in pretty rough shape, and that's normal for these transmissions. After 150,000 miles, it was holding about maybe 2/3 of the vacuum that it should have held. So a central valve bodies drop-in oversized pressure regulator valve kit corrected that problem, so it should be fine. The torque converter clutch release regulator valve that also comes in that kit. It's a 3-valve kit from the CBP, and I didn't use it because it wasn't necessary. It was actually dragging, so I put the stock one back in. Anyway, the valve body's covered in a wholly separate video series, the 2-part deal. So they're pretty involved, pretty extensive in these 6-speed transmissions, the ZF-based family of transmissions, that is. GM, Ford, and ZF, they all take a lot of time and effort to go through to get them back up to par. All right, if you're wondering what this stand is or who makes it, it's made by a company named Norco. They make the engine stand and they make the fixture. So you can use a traditional C-style, C-clamp style fixture with either a base that's mounted to a bench or a traditional engine stand. The reason I got this is frankly because it's a much beefier, sturdier engine stand, and it has a crank which makes, orienting the transmission however which way you want, simple and easy. So I'm gonna have a C fixture made so that I can use this C fixture in conjunction with this engine stand for every other transmission that I do. And I'm actually gonna have two adapters made, one for the transmissions that take a C style fixture, and then for the 4R100s, E4ODs, 50110s, because I do them from time to time, they require another adapter yet again. So anyway, that is the video. I hope it was informative for you, helped you with your 6R80 project if you plan on embarking on one for the first time. Like I said, if you're a builder and you've done plenty of these, you know more about these than I do. And if there's anything that you've seen that concerns you, politely point it out in the comments, and I'll either explain what I did or I will, acknowledge the correction or feedback and make a tech note to the description so that folks, subsequent to your comment will have access to that as well. All right, well, until we meet again, enjoy the rest of your day or evening. It was a pleasure having you. As always, I greatly appreciate your viewership, and if you're a subscriber, thank you for subscribing. If you're not, please do so. I'm going to be putting out more 6R80 and 100, 140 content going forward. I plan to do a lot more of these, so it'll be a good source of information for you if you are interested in these transmissions, as well as the GM6Ls and the ZF units. So, all right. Thanks again. We will chat soon. Enjoy the rest of your day or evening.